towards for the disappearance in Death Valley. Thanks. So, almost 2 years ago, I'm a little bit of an internet addict, and I like to sit and read the news and read everything that I possibly can. And there was a news story that popped up that really grabbed my attention and sort of intrigued me. And it was about the discovery of some bones in Death Valley. And the people that were found were some missing tourists that had disappeared back in 1996. They were a family. So it was Egbert Rinkus, his girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, and then their 2 children, but not with each other, with girlfriends and boyfriends from before. The youngest child was 4, and the other child was 10. And they had discovered Egbert's remains, but they hadn't found the children just yet. And the news article sort of seemed like, on one hand, it was sort of a coda or a finishing point of some story that I wasn't very aware of. And then, on the other hand, it sort of opened up this other set of questions continuing, like what happened to the other kids, what happened to them specifically. And basically, I started doing more research. I kind of set aside the news article because I wasn't sure what was going to happen with it. And talking with someone else, they mentioned a German author by the name of Karl May. And Karl May wrote about the American West in the late 19th and early 20th century. And really, the way that he wrote about the American West is very naive. He spoke about the American West as if anyone who came straight off a boat from Germany would be able to sort of master the terrain and space. So he sort of wrote about himself, even though he never actually went to the American West. And his main character interacts with a Native American, and there's this really romanticized idea of what Native American life was like in the United States, what the cowboy experience was, and what it would be like for immigrants coming in. And the books themselves were extraordinarily popular in Germany and actually in the surrounding area. What was really intriguing was, you know, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but I know that I certainly hadn't. And I lived in Oklahoma for a very long time, and I lived out in California, so deep in the heart of the American West. And I hadn't really heard anything about this guy. And so I started to realize that his writing and what happened to these tourists sort of intersected. And I was trying to sort of piece together what happened. Meanwhile, I started doing more research on the tourists themselves and started to realize that all these conspiracy theories had popped up about them. Had they been murdered and had their bodies dumped somewhere? Basically, what had happened was they had rented a minivan in Las Vegas and driven through Death Valley with very little provisions. They had like a 6-pack of beer, no water, no food, nothing with them, no maps. They stopped by a cabin that was in Anvil Creek and stole an American flag from there, put their names down on a guest book saying that they were going to try to go through a specific part of the park, and then never were heard from again. In October of 1996, their minivan was discovered, and as you can see, I did a representation of that. 3 of the tires were flat, one of which was almost off the rim. And their supplies, meager as they were inside the car. There was no passports, no identification, no sign of what happened to the family themselves. The only thing that you could see was that there were tracks for about 200 yards of the car trying to drag itself through the canyon, and of course it's a minivan, so they off-roaded the minivan into the desert itself around some very rocky terrain. And so from about 1996 until 2009 when they were discovered, there was a lot of speculation as to what had happened to them. Most people assumed that they were, dead, because the time that they were driving through Death Valley was July, and record temperatures was 120 degrees during the daytime. And so it was very little chance that the family had actually survived. It was just mostly a matter of trying to figure out why and where they had gone to. And so if you look at the forums, these forums are all across the board. It's anything from For the Lost, which is specifically for missing people, to Toyota Cruiser forums, to a vast amount. And so it's very peculiar how much people have gotten very interested in this very morbid subject. And obviously I'm one of them. So basically what I tried to set out to do with this project was allow others to sort of invest and explore in the same way that I did and many other people have with his family. So the placard sort of sets up what had happened to them in 1996 and that their van is missing. And then you've got a representation of the sort of crime scene itself. And then inside the actual cabinets, these chairs here to sort of encourage some exploration, there are photographs that I actually went to their hometown and I tracked down where they lived and took photographs of both the neighborhood and the house that they actually lived in themselves to try and get a better understanding of what it was that, made them decide to take a minivan into the middle of Death Valley, the hottest month of the year, the hottest day of the month of the year, and try and get in their heads a little bit. And so, as you progress through all of the cabinet drawers, they go from the missing persons paperwork and some of the brief speculation to talking about Karl May. The interesting thing about Karl May is he actually lived in the same area that the tourists did. There's actually museums that are very close by that most likely they visited. There's also museums about East Germany, and it's during the Soviet control. And what I sort of speculate is what happened was that, it's right after East Germany's collapse and the reunification and everything. So communism is finally dead. They've still got that sort of romanticism of what the American West is. They want adventure. They're finally able to leave. And the sort of concept of what space is and what nature is very different in Europe. For example, I was in England for a while, and people asked me if they could drive from Indiana to New York for a couple of days, and I was like, not really. So it's very interesting how much that sort of affected them. And so as you progress through, you sort of learn about Karl May and what he was like, and then you realize that he was a criminal, and he actually started writing while he was in prison, and potentially may have been mentally ill. And you start to also learn that there are several other tourists that have perished in Death Valley and just how perilous the terrain is. And then you also have the press release of finding the bones and the county sheriff sort of trying to appease the public that are so interested in this case, continuing forth. So basically it's sort of a mystery or a detective story, and quite honestly when it comes to conspiracy theories there's not that much of a difference between a mystery and a conspiracy theory, because you're sort of doing the same detective work and trying to discover what it is that happened. And so that's really the focus of this. It is a hard piece to collectively integrate with and interact with, but sometimes that happens. So you're more than welcome to take a closer look. The diorama was also inspired by one of the museums, the Karl May Museum. They had a ton of dioramas of the scenes from the books that he wrote. Actually, it was the Karl May house. I apologize. So